Part 4. Perception and discernment. Perception is the faculty, or act, or consciousness whereby it apprehends, comprehends, or takes cognizance of the reports of the senses reaching it in the form of sensation. James defines it as the consciousness of particular material things present to sense. It is that power or faculty of the mind by means of which the latter interprets the raw materials of thought furnished through sensation. Discernment is perception intelligently applied and consciously directed. You will remember that in completed sensation the final stage is that mental state arising from the consciousness of the physical impression upon the brain substance derived from the excitation of the sensory nerves. It is the mental representation of the physical impression. This mental state also constitutes the elemental and primary stage of perception. The higher and more complex manifestations of perception involve the exercise of memory, association, and a certain degree of reasoning power. Perception, aided by the other mental faculties to some extent, gives to you your first real knowledge of the outside world. You will also remember that not all sensations are received in consciousness, not all are perceived by the mind as a fact, but a comparatively small number of your sensations are so perceived. Moreover, in simple perception there is but a comparatively slight apprehension or cognizance, but a slight knowing of the object perceived. It is only when voluntary attention begins more actively to manifest its powers that your real knowing actually begins. While perception depends upon the senses for its raw materials, it relies for its fuller manifestation upon thought in some degree or form. Perception, then, may be regarded as the thought arising from the feeling of sensation. Sensation is feeling, perception is the beginning of thought. Sensation brings to you the feeling of the things of the outside world. Perception interprets this feeling by identifying it with the outside thing arousing the feeling, and referring it to that outside thing. From perception all of your higher mental states arise. The processes of perception are as follows. 1. Attention causing consciousness to become aware of the definite sensation arising from indefinite nervous excitement. 2. Thought interpreting the definite sensation and attributing it to the outside object causing it. And 3. Reason, based upon experience, perceiving the sensation producing element of the outside object to be a quality, property, or attribute of that outside object. For example, you touch a piece of heated iron. You first, 1. Become aware of a certain sensation reaching you through your sensory nerves without any consciousness of anything but the feeling element. Then, 2. You interpret this feeling as heat, and attribute it to the piece of iron. Then, 3. You perceive that heat to be a quality of iron in that particular condition. The above statement may seem to be merely a needless elaboration of a familiar experience, but when you were a little child you actually gained this experience by passing through precisely these several stages of perception, and all your knowledge gained by actual experience has been so acquired. The infant or young child at first experiences but indefinite sensations. It is not able to interpret these, nor to refer them to particular external objects, nor to deduce that the feeling of producing powers constitute qualities in that and similar external objects. As it grows older, and gains experience, however, it begins to realize that sensation has a practical meaning only insofar as it refers to definite objects causing it, that the meaning of sensation must be sought in perception. The natural education of the child consists almost entirely of its discovering by perception the real meaning and source of sensation. It is only in this way that the child brings about a harmonious relation and practical working unity between its world of experience and the things of the outside world. Perception, then, is seen to consist of your power to apprehend and cognize the qualities and relations of outside things reported by sensation. The greater the extent of your discovery of such qualities and relations, the greater is the degree of practical knowledge and experience possessed by you. Your entire stock of knowledge is built up in this way. This because all that your mind is able to know about the things of the outside world is the knowledge of the characteristic qualities and relations of those things. When you define a thing, you but state its qualities and its relations, and such qualities and relations are known to you only by means of perception. To know all the qualities and relations of a thing is equivalent to knowing fully the nature or character of that thing, at least so far as human knowledge is capable of full knowledge of anything. In the higher acts of perception all of the mental faculties or powers are represented. For instance, you obtain a sensation of form and color, evidently related to a certain tree. Your memory, based upon experience, identifies this form and color as connected with fruit. Your experience informs you that this particular fruit is a peach. Examining the object closer, you see that the peach is in that condition which your experience interprets as ripe. Your memory and experience inform you that ripe peaches are pleasant to the taste, and your imagination makes a mental picture of the sweetness and general satisfaction of the taste which form qualities of that peach. Then your will acts to pluck that peach, if such be deemed proper in the light of reason and feeling, and to eat it. But all that you know about that peach when you see it has been gained by experience along the lines of the gradual and progressive processes of sensation, perception, memory, imagination and thought. This, again, may seem needless elaboration, but such is the way by which you have learned about the qualities of peaches and the processes by means of which you must learn about any and every other thing when you first become acquainted with it. You learn only by experience based upon your perception of the qualities and relations of things, and your perception arises from sensation. Your world of experience is created by perception. You will do well to fix this fact in your mind, for it is important. Distinction between sensation and perception. We ask you to consider, in the form of the following summary, the distinction between sensation and perception. This distinction is a somewhat difficult one for many students, and it is important for the purpose of the present instruction that you should be able clearly to make it. Here follows the summary. In sensation, the mind is conscious simply of an inflowing feeling. In perception, the mind goes out toward the object of that feeling. Sensation flows inward, perception moves outward. In sensation, the mind is passive. In perception, the mind is active. Sensation necessarily implies neither the belief in nor the conviction of the existence of an outside object. The infant's early experiences show this plainly. Perception necessarily implies a belief in and conviction of the existence of an outside object causing sensation. Sensation is concerned merely with inner mental states. Perception involves also the recognition of outer things. Sensation requires merely consciousness. Perception requires thought directed toward an outside object. Sensation knows only the inner feeling giving rise to it. Perception knows also the outside thing which causes the inner feeling. Perception is a power of the mind, not of the physical senses. It is capable of an almost incredible degree of training, cultivation and development. There are certain laws governing its development and training. It is possible for you to train and develop your powers of perception to such a degree that you may become a veritable master of perception. If your ambition does not reach such heights, you may at least develop and train your powers of perception to such a degree and extent that you will double or treble your efficiency in your chosen field of endeavor, and also fit yourself for still higher planes of work in the world. You, yourself, are the creator of your world of experience, and you create it largely by means of your powers of perception. It is for you to decide just what you wish to create. Your action upon that decision will perform the creative work. In order that you may realize the full possibilities of the development of the powers of perception along the lines of each of the several senses, we call your attention to the following scientific statements of examples and instances of cases in which certain individuals have developed such powers far beyond that of the average person. Such individuals were not possessed of abnormal senses, or sensory organs. Their sensory organs were probably no more efficient than are yours, but their mental powers of perception had been so trained and developed as to cause them to appear to be gifted with abnormal powers. Visual perception. The mental power of perception of the impressions received through the sense of sight is capable of extraordinary improvement by training. This improvement, and the training which produces it, proceeds along three general lines, viz. 1. The line of increased quickness and readiness in the visual perception of general or special objects. 2. The line of increased capacity for discerning and perceiving minute objects which ordinarily escape visual observation. And 3. The line of increased powers of discriminating and perceiving the subtle and slight differences of form, size, color, and general composition or arrangement of parts, in the objects observed. It should be noted, in passing, that one may train his visual perception along any one of these three lines, and attain great efficiency in it, yet with but comparatively little improvement in the other two lines. As examples of trained visual perception along the above-mentioned lines, the following instances will serve to illustrate the principle. Howden, who had developed marvelous powers of visual perception, once said, I can safely assert that a lady seeing another pass at full speed in a carriage will have time to analyze her toilette from her bonnet to her shoes, and be able to describe not only the fashion and quality of the stuffs, but also to say whether the lace be real or only machine made. I have known ladies to do this. Howden, himself, acquired by practice and self-training the faculty of being able to pass rapidly before a shop window, bestowing but one full glance upon its contents, and then, when out of sight of the window, correctly to call off or write down a complete list of the window's contents, including even the merest trifles there displayed. Not only this, but he also taught his assistants to perform the same feat as a preparation for respective careers as conjurers. Celebrated artists have won wagers by painting satisfactory portraits of persons upon whom they had bestowed but a single though comprehensive glance. Noted scholars have acquired by practice the art of reading long sentences, paragraphs, or portions of printed pages at a single glance. In fact, many students are able to read a whole line of a printed column at a glance, after but slight practice. Professor Porter, once president of Yale, is said to have been able to read at a single, quick glance, a quarter and sometimes a half page of an ordinary textbook. Instances of similar proficiency are far from uncommon. Book reviewers frequently are able to catch the spirit of a book, and to obtain a very comprehensive idea of its contents, by rapidly turning its pages and skimming through it, stopping only here and there when some particularly attractive passage presents itself. Others frequently handling books acquire similar proficiency. Large department stores employ skilled observers to report the special features displayed in the business establishments of their rivals in trade. These observers promenade leisurely through the aisles and corridors of the rival establishments, carefully noting the details of the articles of merchandise there displayed, or the arrangement of the goods, or other points concerning which their employers desire information. They frequently attain wonderful proficiency along these lines. Some of them are renowned for their almost photographic powers of perception. Milliners and celebrated dressmakers are very careful not to subject their advanced styles and models to even the casual inspection of strangers, since these visitors often turn out to be the trained observers employed by others in the same lines of business. Along the same general lines are the activities of the spies sent out by professional thieves to discover and report the details of the premises which have been selected as the scene of future burglaries. Disguised as beggars, peddlers, telegraph messengers, errand boys, telephone inspectors, electrical light repairers, etc., these spies gain access to the premises. Once in a house or a room, the spy glances hastily around, carefully noting the location of the doors, windows, locks, receptacles, stairways, etc., from which observations a map is afterward drawn to be used by the professional burglars or sneak thieves. Military spies often attain wonderful proficiency along these lines. A single glance frequently suffices to give them a comprehensive and detailed idea and mental picture of important military preparations and plans. Along the second lines of visual perception, we find scientists and special workers in certain trades who have attained great efficiency in the direction of perceiving minute objects which escape the perceptive attention of the ordinary persons. Watchmakers possess this faculty. Makers of delicate scientific instruments likewise have acquired the faculty of distinguishing minute objects and parts of things. Microscopists by practice develop the power of perceiving very minute objects and their details, wherein trained observers gazing through the same lens perceive merely a tiny speck, or minute blur. The magnifying instrument increases the strength of the minute physical impression, but it requires the trained observer's mental power of perception to perceive and to know that impression made upon his brain tissue. Along the third lines of visual perception, we have many instances of the wonderful efficiency of trained observers who are able to perceive and to discriminate between the subtle and slight differences in the form, size, color and general composition or arrangement of parts, in the objects under observation by them. In fact, specialists in any business, trade, art or profession must acquire proficiency of this kind in order to be successful in their particular line. Bank employees become very expert in handling coin, or banknotes. Often they are able to detect counterfeits almost instinctively, so keen have become their powers of visual perception, though in this particular case they are often aided by tactile perception. Experts in handwriting are able to distinguish between the finest shades of difference in the written words, often being able to discover differences arising from the varying physical condition of the individual as evidenced in his several writings. Artists, as you well know, are able to distinguish between shades and hues, and combinations of color. They are able to see diversity where the ordinary observer perceives sameness and identity. Subtle distinctions which are imperceptible to the ordinary observer, stand out most strikingly to the perceptive faculties of the trained artist or worker in colors. Dyers, and dealers in colored fabrics, as well as many purchasers of those fabrics, are able to distinguish between very minute differences in shades, tints, and hues of color in fabrics. The color sense of some trained observers sometimes seem to other persons like an additional sense. Herschel said that the highly trained visual perception of the workers upon the mosaics in the Vatican enabled them to distinguish correctly between 30,000 different shades of color. Expert readers of character, and good judges of human nature, are often able so accurately to distinguish between the different shades of expression manifested by the human features, that they can interpret with a startling degree of correctness the inner feelings or thoughts of the person at that time. Persons having much to do with a number of subordinates in a school, office, workshop, army, etc., often become very efficient in many cases in sensing what is in the mind or feelings of those in their charge or under their authority. The skilled school teacher acquires proficiency in this line. The expert salesman also becomes an adept in this direction. Women, as a rule, seem by nature to possess this particular phase of this faculty well developed, this probably because their success and happiness in life frequently depends to a great extent upon their ability to sense and to act upon the moods of men. Whatever may be the true reason, however, the woman of experience often surprises men by her perception of what is in the mind of the men and of other women. We may like to call this intuition, but more often it is merely the result of an unconsciously developed power of accurate visual perception along these particular lines. The observer knows what certain expressions mean, even though those manifesting them are seeking to conceal their inner thoughts and feelings. Auditory perception. The power of perception of impressions received through the sense of hearing is capable of extraordinary improvement by training. This improvement, and the training which produces it, proceed along three general lines, viz. 1. The line of increased capacity for perception of the general distinction between the general properties of sound, namely, the quality, intensity, and the volume or quantity of the sound impressions. 2. The line of the increased capacity for perception of the musical attributes of sound, i.e., the pitch, the tone, the harmony. 3. The line of the increased capacity for perception of the articulateness, distance, and direction of sounds. It should be noted, however, that one may train his auditory perception along any one of these three lines, and attain great efficiency in it, yet with comparatively little improvement in the other two lines. Physiologists and psychologists have made the interesting discovery that in the case of many persons who are supposed to be slightly deaf, or somewhat hard of hearing, there exists no physical deficiency whatever. The organs and mechanism of hearing are normal in many of such cases. The explanation of this apparent paradox is found in the fact that such persons have failed to develop normally the perceptive powers of that part of the mind which is concerned in auditory perception. In short, such persons are deficient in the power of attending to the sounds reaching them through their ears, and in the faculty of interpreting or understanding them, of perceiving them mentally. It is gratifying to be able to state that such cases are usually capable of being cured of their deafness under the proper methods of awakening the attention, and of training the auditory perception. In this connection it is interesting to note the cases of persons who seem to be deficient in hearing ordinary conversation, but who will very quickly and distinctly hear even the slightest whisper of the voices of persons who are discussing the careless hearer, i.e., making personal remarks concerning him, or her. Here we have a familiar example of the result of the failure to employ attention, and the marked improvement when attention is actually employed. As Harvey said, that only a half of the deafness that exists is the result of inattention, cannot be doubted. Some old women who experience much difficulty in hearing ordinary conversation, and complain that they are hard of hearing, will be found to be very keen in hearing a bit of whispered gossip, or the low-toned criticisms of themselves on the part of others. Attention follows interest. In such cases, and perception follows attention. It is generally held that auditory perception is more susceptible of education, cultivation and development, and may be more easily and effectively trained than any other form of perception. You may witness on all sides many convincing illustrative examples of its possibilities in this direction. The blind depend upon this highly developed perceptive faculty to a great extent. They can walk easily through a crowded thoroughfare guided only by the sounds perceived and interpreted by them, but of which the normal individual will not be aware. They can tell when they are passing a stationary object, such as a lamp post, and frequently they can discriminate between a standing man and a lamp post by means of the difference in the reverberations of the sound of their own footsteps received through the ear and interpreted by perception. They readily distinguish between the respective rumbles of the different street cars, and can inform you to what particular car line the passing car belongs. We have known cases in which the blind man has been able correctly to inform us of the size and type of a passing automobile. Likewise, blind persons usually can distinguish between an empty room and one in which another person happens to be, all by means of their keen perception of sounds. The savage, by placing his ear upon the ground, often is able to perceive the approach of men or wild animals, frequently displaying an almost incredible degree of perceptive power in this direction. The director of a large orchestra usually can detect even the slightest failure or mistake in time or tune on the part of one of the many instruments under his direction, and to point unerringly to the guilty performer. Skilled musicians will perceive and shudder at slight inharmonies or similar imperfections occurring during the rendition of some complicated and technical number by a large orchestra, while others are totally unaware of any such occurrence. There are persons who truthfully may be said never to forget a voice once heard even though years have elapsed. We have known persons who could pick out the sound of a particular footstep from among many others echoing along the corridor of a large building. It is said that a mother sheep can distinguish the bleat of her own lamb from that of scores of other lambs in the flock. Young animals usually can unerringly recognize the sound of the voice of the mother. It is a poor chick which cannot recognize the cluck of its own hen. Human mothers frequently can distinguish the wail of their own particular infants from those of others in the same building. We witnessed a test of this several of years ago, in which the blindfolded mothers, almost without exception, moved directly toward the right crying infant. Telegraphers know the difference between the sounds of the respective messages sent by different operators. They can usually name the particular operator, provided that they have had time to become acquainted with his manner of sending. Engineers and operatives in a railroad yard can distinguish between the different whistles of a large number of locomotives. Old steamboat men frequently know the whistles of every steamboat on the river, and many boys living on the shores are equally proficient in this respect. Machinists can detect the slightest difference in the sound proceeding from the machine under their care, and often know the precise point at which trouble exists, and the nature of the disturbance as well, all from the slight difference in the general sound proceeding from the machine. It is a very inattentive man who cannot distinguish between the rings of his own telephone or doorbell, and that of his neighbor. Instances and illustrations of this kind might be multiplied almost indefinitely, but the principle involved is the same in all such cases. This principle is, auditory perception is developed by attention and practice, and attention is stimulated by interest or self-interest. Gustatory perception. The power of perception of impressions received through the sense of taste is capable of extraordinary improvement by training. Unfortunately, however, but few persons consider it worthwhile to cultivate the sense of taste scientifically, except the few who make gods of their stomachs, and who live to eat instead of eating to live. Kay says, there can be no doubt that if this sense, taste, were properly trained and directed, instead of being, as it generally is, led astray or perverted by excessive indulgence, it would be a much more reliable guide than it is at present. Professor G. Wilson says, we eat what we should not eat, drink what we should not drink, eat too much of what we may eat, and drink too much of what we may drink, and the result is that we ruin our health, enfeeble our bodies, dull our intellects, brutalize our feelings, and harden our hearts. Moreover, as some modern physiologists hold, we miss most of our taste values by not understanding how to extract the taste from our food, thus habituating ourselves to gross eating and gluttony. Instead of being true epicures manifesting moderation in eating and drinking but securing the full taste of values and a high form of aesthetic enjoyment. Epicures inform us that there exists a harmony in tastes as well as in colors and in sounds, some tastes modifying, intensifying, or harmonizing with others with which they are associated. Dr. Miller says, in the art of cooking, attention has at times been paid to the consonance or harmony of flavors in their combination or order of succession, just as in painting and music the fundamental principles of harmony have been employed empirically, while the theoretical laws were unknown. Examples of highly developed gustatory perception are had in the case of the tea tasters, and the wine tasters of commerce. The tea taster is employed to pass upon the flavor, quality, and value of submitted samples of tea. If experienced, he will be able to inform you as to the technical merits or demerits of the sample, its general grade, the locality of its production, the method of its curing, and also its current market value, all this resulting from the mere passing of the drawn tea over his tongue. The wine taster performs a similar service, in much the same way. In both of the above he has cited cases, however, the sense of smell plays a considerable part in the perceptive process. In certain lines of business in which articles of food are dealt with, there are men who are adepts in tasting such articles, and thus determining their quality and value. This faculty is acquired by practice and training, interest and attention developing the perception. Certain chemists, also, possess marked ability in this particular direction. Moreover, certain skilled epicures are said to be able to state correctly just what are the ingredients of any given sauce or dressing, as well as its relative proportions, and also to state correctly the manner in which has been killed the animal whose meat they are eating. Roman epicures were able to tell by the taste whether the fish was caught above or below a certain bridge, and some modern epicures claim to be able to decide by taste on which leg the partridge was accustomed to sleep. Such things, however, are entirely outside the world of the ordinary individual. Olfactory perception. The power of perception of impressions received through the sense of smell is capable of extraordinary improvement by training. But few modern civilized persons, however, deem it worthwhile to undertake any such development or training. Smell has grown out of fashion. It would seem some moderns seem even to regard it as an unworthy and animal-like sense, probably because of its lack of cultivation and training in modern times and in civilized communities. The ancients, however, regarded this sense as of high value and importance, and treated it with marked respect. Incense and perfumes played a large part in the lives of the ancients, and even today the Orientals pay much attention to them. Thoughtful men have regretted the modern relegation of this sense to the background. They point out that mental associations frequently cluster around sensations of smell far more strongly than around other classes of sensations. There is romance in the recollection of the smell of a favorite perfume, or of a certain flower, a romance which is readily revived by a present-day experience of that same odor. Did you ever read that wonderful poem that begins, "But, oh, the smell of that jasmine flower"? There is a suggestive power and value to odors, far surpassing those of sights or sounds. They appeal to the emotions most powerfully. Their memories persist longer. Many hold that as a valuable source of pleasure and of mental enjoyment the sense of smell demands far more care and attention than it commonly receives. The lower animals, and the primitive races of mankind, as well as the blind of our own time and land, have very highly developed senses of smell, this due to use, habit, and necessity. Some young children also possess the power of effective olfactory perception, but disuse serves to eliminate this as they grow older. In most cases, some psychologists, however, hold that the human race frequently exercises this sense and perceptive power along subconscious lines, and that many of our likes and dislikes are influenced thereby. Certain perfumes are held to be sexual accidents. Perfumers, chemists, and men whose business necessitates the knowledge of the odor and aroma of their wares, as for instance, dealers in certain kinds of food, tobacco, flowers, etc., frequently possess a highly developed power of olfactory perception. We see here the operation of the same general principle of development, namely, interest, attention, and perception. Tactile perception. The power of perception of the impressions received through the sense of touch is capable of extraordinary improvement by training. This improvement, and the training which produces it, proceeds along four general lines, viz. 1. The line of increased perception of minute objects or parts of objects. 2. The line of increased perception of certain qualities and conditions of objects, and their details or composition, arrangement, or relation of their parts or attachments. 3. The line of increased perception of temperature. 4. The line of increased perception of conditions of weight, spatial dimensions, etc., by the so-called muscular sense. Watchmakers and others who constantly handle minute objects, and adjust delicate parts of mechanical contrivances, are found to possess wonderfully developed tactile perception. Their sensitive fingertips become almost like organs of sight so far as is concerned their efficiency in the delicate work in which they are engaged. Likewise, the manufacturer and the professional buyer of woolen, silk, or cotton fabrics frequently depends materially upon this highly trained sense of touch. Wool sorters instantly grade the wool passing through their hands, and wool buyers depend upon the same sense in deciding the value of the materials under examination. The engraver passes his hand lightly over the engraved plate, and is able to detect instantly even the slightest imperfection upon it. Experts in various lines of trade are often paid large salaries by reason of their developed and trained tactile perception. We need scarcely call your attention to the highly developed sense of touch of the blind. To witness a trained blind man read rapidly by means of applying his fingertips to the surface of the raised letters of a book is a revelation, and to witness his manual dexterity in successfully performing technical, delicate work which would be difficult even for a man of keen sight, is almost like witnessing a miracle. As Taine says, at present we have only rough discrimination as to the tactile sensations. We can hardly distinguish their shades of difference, for want of being compelled to do so. With some blind persons, the sense of touch surpasses all imagination. It is enough to see blind men employ this sense, to comprehend all the discrimination which our touch might have, but has not acquired. Persons whose occupations necessitate a quick and ready perception of temperature will be found to have acquired the necessary development of this phase of the sense of touch. Cooks discriminate nicely in this matter, and manufacturing chemists, preservers, canners, makers of toilet preparations, and others become very proficient in the art of detecting the fine, nice distinctions and variations of temperature found necessary in their processes of manufacture. Some, indeed, become so expert as justly to be entitled to their title of human thermometers. The average housewife is able to gauge with a high degree of correctness the temperature of her oven, or of her cooking dishes, or of her iron. The experienced physician often is able to determine whether a patient has a temperature the moment he applies his hand, this being remarkable when it is remembered that the difference so detected is that merely of a few degrees. That phase of tactile perception which is often called the muscular sense, also is capable of the highest development and training. In fact, instances of such cultivation are to be seen in the case of every skilled artisan. This phase of tactile perception employs the muscles, especially the voluntary muscles, as its organs and instruments of impression, by means of which it detects differences in weight, pressure, force, resistance, hardness, softness, spatial dimensions, etc. It is by means of this form of perception that you become aware of the effort being put forth by the muscles in performing certain movements, and thus may direct and regulate them. Without it all voluntary purposeful muscular movements would be impossible, except and so far as the other senses might supply the deficiency. Even in the simple act of walking, dressing, using knife and fork, or shaving, we have evidences of training of this form of tactile perception. In drawing, painting, engraving, and other forms of manual exertion we display a still greater degree of training. When you detect differences of weight or of size by means of the hands, you manifest the same kind of training. The manual dexterity of the pianist, the skill of the rapier walker, the juggler, the conjurer, the acrobat, the skilled touch of the masseur, the osteopathic or chiropractic physician, depend upon the training of this phase of perception. The billiard player depends for his skill upon this training, and so likewise does the expert baseball batter. The artisan or the tradesman who takes hold of an object in order to determine its weight or size, is manifesting the skill which he has gained in the training of this phase of perception. The blind man employs it to a still greater extent. By means of it he obtains all of his ideas of weight and size. The blind man, wishing to ascertain the size and shape of a table, passes his hand around it wishing to ascertain its weight, he lifts it. Many of us instinctively take hold of an object when we wish to obtain an idea of its weight, and most of us find it much easier to estimate the size, length, breadth, height, or depth of an object by placing our hands upon it, instead of depending solely upon visual perception. Important as is this phase of tactile perception, which is technically known as the muscular sense, it is a surprising fact that but few of us have ever realized that it existed, at least until our attention has been directed to it. We have taken it for granted far more than has been the case concerning the other phases of sensation and perception. The consideration of the foregoing instances and examples illustrating the principle of this special development, cultivation, and training of perception should cause you to realize the wonderful possibilities existing for you in a similar direction. What others have done, can do, and are now doing that you also can do. If you have employed your powers of analysis, you will have already perceived the general principles underlying each and every one of these instances of special development, viz. 1. Interest, or self-interest, 2. Desire, or strong wish to attain, 3. Purposeful determination, or the will to attain, 4. Practice, or acquiring the habit, 5. Exercise, or strengthening the habit, 6. Judgment, or the right direction of the application of the new faculty, and 7. Use, or the actual, efficient employment of the faculty for some definite purpose, end, and service.